The views and opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of Natural Bridges Media or KSQD's staff, volunteers, or underwriters.
Hello and welcome to Talk of the Bay. I'm your host, Len B.A. My guest is John Golder, who has been a resident of the Santa Cruz area since 1978. He's been a solar innovator, a builder, a designer, a teacher of skills. And so welcome, John Golder.
Thank you. It's really great to be here and do this interview. And I've been looking forward to it.
Great. Well, it's good to have you here. And I wondered if you could start out by telling us a little bit about your background, your upbringing, and what ultimately brought you to Santa Cruz.
Well, I grew up till 9 years old. I was in Chicago, and one of the first things I remember that really set a fire under me was the movie Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier. And all the kids were running around with little coonskin caps on, and we had a backyard that had a palisade fence with logs on it, and it looked just like an old-fashioned fort. And I was running around pretending to be Davy Crockett and playing with my toy soldiers and all that kind of stuff. But it really intrigued me to be a skilled person in the wilderness and be able to be a leader and be able to be a hero and fight bad guys. All this stuff was in the movie. And, Davy Crockett, yeah, he was a big, big hero to us. And I almost completed the Davy Crockett trading card bubblegum series. But, so that lit my fire, okay? That lit my fire and to do a lot of outdoor stuff. And I've done tremendous, that's been a huge part of my life is doing stuff outdoors. So we moved out to Arizona in 1957, and we were on a ranch. Grew up on a ranch, and I lived there up through high school. And I had a lot of fun going out in the desert, despite the overwhelming heat, and just discovering critters. Disney made another movie called The Magic Desert, and there was some amazing shots in there. And I actually got to witness one of those things, which was a tarantula and a tarantula hawk in a battle, where the tarantula hawk is a wasp, a big wasp, and it stings and kills, paralyzes the tarantula and lays its eggs in a tarantula, and then that gets buried, and the little hawks, wasps come out. I actually witnessed that, and I didn't know how special it was to see something like that. So, just things really developed for me. I love to build things. I tell people I started building when I crawled into a sandbox at 3 years old, and I've been building ever since. And I built a 7-room underground fort when I was in grade school, just out of whatever I could find in back of the corral. And I built a treehouse with windows, door, a roof, and running water when I was in middle school.
Wow!
And it was up in a giant,
the perfect middle school getaway.
Yeah. It was a giant mulberry tree in our yard. Our yard was lush, like an oasis in the desert. And I'd climb up there. There was no ladder to it. I made it so my parents couldn't get up there. And I'd go up there and get in a hammock up above the treehouse. They couldn't see me and they couldn't hear me. And they'd be down below. Where's Johnny? Well, he needs to do his chores. And, I'm not going.
Yeah, I've spent some time in the Southwest, and those mulberries will grow really well there if they get some water.
Extremely well.
Big.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I remember camping under a mulberry in New Mexico that was probably 40 feet high.
Well, so I was getting in construction, and I would build little model Western towns, because I was fascinated with the West and the Indians and all that. Little Western towns out of shoeboxes stuff, and I'd do the inside with crayon, and I'd put a little outside on it, little signs and little doors and windows and everything like that. And I played out there by myself endlessly in the sandbox and anywhere I could. And later on built ship models and that, because I love boats and love ships. And out there in Arizona, It wasn't
There's
anything.
not a lot of water.
But I had been on the USS Constitution when I was 5 years old. My mother took me down to Washington, D.C. when I was 5 years old. I was 5 or 6. And I know one of the things I remember, I insisted on climbing the stairs of the Washington Monument.
Ah, yeah.
And we did it together, and I tuckered her out, and I made it up and down. But the Constitution just fascinated me. You know, the
Yeah.
masts and the cannon and everything
Yeah,
like
that's
that.
a full size masted schooner with, well,
It's not a schooner, sir.
no, it's not a schooner, excuse me.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's a sailing ship.
Yeah, well, it's a frigate. Technically, it's a
Okay.
frigate, yeah.
Yeah.
3 masts, and so I bought the...
And that's the one with the steel sheeting on the sides, right?
No, it did not have steel. They called it Old Ironsides, and here's why they did. In the battle, one of the battles it had, and it never lost a battle, the soldiers and sailors actually saw cannonballs, iron cannonballs, bounce off the oak sides of the Constitution, and that's how it got the name Old Ironsides.
Ah.
So I bought the model for Revell, but the rigging was so complicated. It was a model for advanced model builders, and I never got it all together. So I went on. I was I grew up and sports was a huge part of my life. Football, and my dad was a weightlifter and weight training and that. So I was really well trained, and I worked really hard to become an athlete. I was a very fast runner, and I was the quarterback on the 6th grade team, and we won second in the county. So I was used to being at the top edge of sports and leading a group. And also in Boy Scouts, the same thing. I was really intense about learning and advancing, and I won lots of honors in Boy Scouts. And when I was I think I was about 8 years old, I read Teddy Roosevelt's biography. And I said, that's the life I want to live, the bully life. Leadership, risk, adventure, and travel. And that's what I've been doing all my life. I've worked hard on it, and it's left me with tremendous memories and a huge skill set. And, reading early was a huge advantage for me. I used to read so much, we'd drive down the road, and I'd read all the signs, and my mother would just tell me to shut up.
Yeah, you're not right. Yeah, and to be grown up on a cattle ranch, were there aspects of that you think added to your interest in all of these things?
Well, I wanted to be a cowboy, but my parents wouldn't let me be a cowboy because basically a lot of them are just drunks and work hard and don't get much pay, and so they wanted me to go to college. So they blocked the road to being a cowboy. But I learned a lot of things from the cowboys, and what I really learned, I think, more than anything, was that something like cattle ranching takes a huge understanding of animals and the environment, and you got to take good care of your critters. My grandmother used to calculate. She was sharp as the dickens. She used to calculate if I made the cows go faster than a stroll, exactly how much poundage I was working off the herd and what that was costing her.
Wow.
So, but I love the outdoors, and I used to wander out in the desert by myself and learn about rattlesnakes and deer and coyotes and jackrabbits and all that stuff. So I just love to do it. Just go out there and discover things in the desert.
Yeah. So how'd you end up in Santa Cruz?
Well, I was at my freshman year in college. I went to UC Santa Barbara, so I wanted to go to California and be by the ocean. That's what brought me out here, and I'd gone to California to visit beforehand to see what it was like, and we did a little bit of surfing, and so I just wanted UC Santa Barbara seemed like the perfect pick for me. I want to get away from the hot desert, be by the ocean, do something about boats, and all that. So I went up to the Summer Love in 1967 in San Francisco, and I was just blown away by what was going on and the anti-war stuff and the hippie stuff and everything else. And I heard about Santa Cruz up there. And on the way back, I came by and I stopped by and I went out where the river meets the ocean, there, looking over the boardwalk up there on that cliff. And I said, I got to come back here one of these days. This is the place to be. This is a lot. It drew me way more than the South America, the South Arizona desert. So I made it out here in '78. You know, it was a long journey to get out here. I was married by then. I had my first child, but I got involved in solar energy. You want to hear the story of what made me make the switch?
Yeah, tell us about that. And I'm just going to add for our audience that that's how you and I met.
Yes.
Because there was an organization called the Alternative Energy Co-op here in Santa Cruz back in the late 70s. And you were teaching workshops.
Yes.
And I attended a couple workshops you taught, and that's how we met.
And thanks to Brian Williams, we had the largest collection of alternative energy and solar books, second largest west of the Mississippi River, because he was a librarian to the science library at UC. He got all the discards or anything that they couldn't keep track of too well. And he's the guy that first exposed me to computers. And a Macintosh blew me away. Anyway, so I was in Arizona, and I had just bought a house, and I poured a new garage slab for the car to work on at a 1950 panel truck. And I was working on the truck, and it was not that hot of a day for Arizona. I mean, it was only up to the high 80s, lower 90s. And I had a wrench that was sitting out in the sunshine for, I don't know, maybe no more than 5 minutes. And I reached out to grab it, and it was so hot I couldn't pick it up. And I'm thinking to myself, damn, why do I have a fire under my water heater in the house when it's that hot? There's that much energy. I said, I'm going to figure out how to do a solar water heater. So, I can only find one book, and it had hardly any pictures, and it was not a how-to book. It was I can't remember the name of the title. It was quite technical and nearly all text. But I read enough to see, okay, you got to get a tubing of some sort and a panel of some sort and paint it black and get it under glass, and it'll get hot. So I had an old copper sheet that my doormate gave me, a graving plate, and I got some copper tubing, and I tried to flatten it out and make a snake, a sinusoid pattern on it, and tried to solder it to that plate, and it was every time I put the soldering iron, it would expand or contract, and things were not going well. So it was an extremely sloppy job, but I got it done with the use of all kinds of alternative ways, and I painted it black and put it in a box with glass on it up on the roof and hooked it up with a little pump in that, and I got it going. I had a thermostat on it, and it was going really good in the daytime, but I noticed it was running all night too. The pump was running all night, and the hot water was keeping it going, because the hot water at that point was keeping the thermostat on.
Oh, of course.
So I realized that you have to either shut the thing off at nighttime, or you have to have what's called a differential thermostat. Duh.
Right. Is it getting cooler,
Yeah,
or is it getting hotter?
So I learned hands-on, and made most mistakes, and I started working on solar cookers. And after I got to Santa Cruz, we moved out here, I was experimenting with solar cookers, and I got a patent on a solar cooker in 1981. And my patent attorney, his name was Bob Slick, which goes back to the hippie days. He was Grace Slick of the Jefferson Airplane's dad, the patent attorney.
Wow.
And he thought my patent was really ingenious. It was so simple. So I went on I probably made 3 dozen different solar cookers and did all kinds of things. Never really went into production, but I can make a solar cooker out of damn near anything these days.
Yeah.
Yeah, it cooks about 2 pounds of food an hour, and as long as there's some sunshine, you can do it. So Len and I were in this alternative energy co-op, and we did all kinds of projects, and really, and from that, I actually wound up doing a weatherization contract training for Ecology Action, through Ecology Action, training some youth at risk to how to weatherize a house. We had hardly any budget, so how are you going to do that? You need doors and windows, and we can't build a house for you. I said, just get me a used door and a used window and a pallet and some lumber, and we'll do it. And that's what I did, and all his kids learned something. And at the time, I was the city's energy inspector. I was the city's first energy inspector. I got the
Oh,
job.
right, with the early California Energy Code.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. They came in, I think it came in 80 or 81, and I was already doing solar consulting and solar remodels and solar construction. And when it came time to compete for the job, I think there was 25 applicants. I came out on top. So I did all the energy checks, and I developed a computer program on a 1984 computer that cost me $4,000 and ran off floppy disks.
Oh, yes.
And a black and orange screen and no graphics.
It's a different era.
Yeah, and with two printers and the software cost me $4,000 in 1984. I had to get a loan from Santa Cruz credit union, Santa Cruz Credit Union,
Right.
Community Credit Union. Yeah. So so I had a solar design business, and I did a lot of very interesting projects. People came to me because I couldn't do energy calculations for people in the city because I was the person who checked those plans, but I could for the county, and did many interesting projects. I did house designs, and I did some wonderful, innovative stuff, passive solar, and I can't go over all the different techniques, but every place I did was different. I had something built down in Aromas for vice president of a bank, Japanese style house, very interesting. I went in Arizona. I did an observatory, a 25-inch telescope, $50,000 telescope, moving roof. I had a mechanical engineer do the calcs and tell me we only need 1/10 of a horsepower to move the roof back and forth. I said, let's do that with a hand wheel. And so I designed a hand wheel, and a 5-year-old kid can open the roof of that observatory because of the efficiency of the system. So I got a reputation of working on innovative projects that other contractors wouldn't handle, and I did a 60-foot geodesic dome in Tucson, and that was in the paper. I worked on a place for a guy that was a Y2K a fortress, you know. I'm not going to go into that because but I did all kinds of stuff, and I was really enjoying my career. I did a passive solar straw bale house with adobe plaster, built-in solar water heater, Rumford fireplace. It was on a tour, and it really worked well. It was an incredible project. We did all kinds of innovative stuff and filmed the construction, and it was just amazing, how well that house worked. That was a huge project for me. So, I came out to Arizona, out to California. After I'd spent 8 years back in Arizona. I was a general contractor back there doing solar stuff. But I came back in 2002.
If you're just joining us, my guest is John Golder. He is a local resident who's been a builder, a teacher of wilderness skills, and many other things. John, you mentioned that you had worked on a project in Arizona, a passive solar design home that was on a design tour for people to see what a passive solar house could look like. Could you tell us a little about that project?
Yes, I got involved in straw bale construction because one of my best friends in high school was working with that and helped get a building code written for straw bale in Pima County. So I wanted to do some innovative work with straw bale, and this was a great project that the lady heard about my reputation for building solar, and so it was, I think, about a 2,500 square foot custom residence with a swimming pool, and passive solar, a post and beam, and straw bale construction. And I was looking to solve a whole lot of problems that had come up in straw bale construction. And because my friend was involved with a newsletter, Straw Bale Construction, it's called The Last Bale, we were learning all about straw bale buildings and visiting different ones and seeing what worked and what didn't and what the problems were. So I was working to solve as many of these problems as I could and learn by experimentation and just thinking of innovative ways to deal with it. So one of the issues with the building, it's on a concrete slab, and it was going to be, the rainy season was going to happen during the time we were putting the bales up. So there's no way we could have the bales sitting on the slab. So we started by putting some 4x4 beams underneath the bale, so there was about 4 inches underneath the bales, and that was filled with gravel. So even if the slab got soaked, the bales wouldn't get wet in the bottom. And it's really hard to dry them out once they soak up the water. So the other thing that happened with a lot of straw bale houses is people to get the straw bales to settle and compress they would just go ahead and build the roof and let it sit for a month or two. Well, we didn't want to have it sit in the rain during the rainy season, and we didn't want to wait that long. We were on a schedule that doesn't conform with ordinary construction schedule because you get paid at certain stages, and they say when the framing's done. Well, there isn't that much framing, and the straw bales are just starting, and we can't wait, another 2 months. We had to pay the workers and make, get the payments. So I figured out a way to compress the wall at the time that we put on the required chicken wire over it. Now, you don't really need the chicken wire to make the plaster stick, but the Pima County Code required it. And most people put it on horizontally, and it was loose as hell, and they had to sew it on there with a person on each side of the bale with a great big long needle and talking to each other so the needle doesn't stab the person as they pass it through. And guys are terrible at that job because they don't listen to each other, and gals are great at it because they talk all the time, and they know exactly where the needle's coming out, and they're they got the gift of gab, and they just love to sit there and do that. So anyway, there was a few places we had to sew, but what I developed was a special a stiff beam that sat up on top about 8 foot of the wall. And then we put loops of rebar in the inside and outside of the slab where they would eventually be either cut off or covered by the plaster. And we hooked so I put this beam on top of the bale wall, and we had a wire and pulley system and a hand winch. It's called a come-along, if somebody's familiar with it. And you jack it down, and we had a scale on it so we could measure how much force we're putting, downward force on it. So we'd crank that thing down, and we had the chicken wire running vertically, but it was loose. And we waited till we got it cranked down to about 800 pounds per square foot, or 800 pounds pressure on the winch and the cable. And then we'd put on the chicken wire and fasten it really good on the bottom where our 4x4s were. And then when we took the thing off there, it held it down really tight. It's all ready to go. It's all ready to roof.
Yeah.
And so that worked really great. And we took a lot of pictures, and then come time for plaster, we're using natural adobe plaster. Now, my brother had a rock and gravel business, but he also knew how to do adobe. He developed his own formula for it, adobe mud. He built his own adobe house. And adobe blocks are a mixture of a little bit of straw and a little bit of emulsion, oil emulsion that helps waterproof it, and the right combination of sand and clay, and then being dried in the sun. Well, we're doing plaster, so the drying in the sun didn't happen. And we're going to plaster inside and out with the adobe. We rented a cement mixer with the operator, and we rented a I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's the device that blows concrete out at high pressure that they do swimming pools with.
Like
gunite.
For gunite.
It's a gunite crew. So we rented that equipment with the operator. My brother brought up the clay mixture when we were ready to plaster and dumped it in the cement mixer to get it all mixed up properly. And then it was dumped into the bin of the gunite guy. And he stood back, and we had to put heavy plywood over all the openings because they had to be in place. The windows and the doors had to be in place. So heavy plywood over them to protect them. And shot this adobe mud on with a gunite thing, and it comes out. I mean, it'll practically kill you coming out. It's coming out at about 30, 40 miles an hour with
it's heavy.
With gravel in it, yeah.
Yeah.
And we had about 8 plasters standing there nearby out of the way. And as soon as they shot enough mud on, these guys would jump in there and smooth it out. And so we do an entire outside wall in about 10 or 12 minutes, 15 minutes at the most.
Wow.
It was just amazing to watch, and it was dangerous. One thing, and we were near the end of it, and there had been a little bit gravel that hadn't been properly screened out of the mix. And what that makes happen with the gunite operator, it makes the device backfire. He's holding it like a giant fire hose, and it backfired on him, and it broke his thumb.
Ouch.
We're right near the end of it, so there was a little bit we didn't get done, and when he came back and did it later, it was getting cold. Winter was coming, and it actually got down to freezing at one corner of the house. And it turned out that one corner of the house, the adobe plaster just didn't set up. It had to be continually repaired, which is not a huge deal because it's a simple, you can mix it by hand and you just plaster it on. But it's just one of the things we learned. And we took movies, we have movies of this stuff being done. But it was, all these different things. Oh, and then when we did the roof, one of the issues with a straw bale is where to run the plumbing and the electricity.
Right.
You can't practically run them through the bales. You have to drill a hole through straw. That's really hard to do. Or you run it, in the surface underneath the plaster, and that's not really up to code unless you put it in conduit, which is an extra expense. And it makes it really hard to make modifications. And the other thing was getting all the roof rafters in line. So it was going to have a metal roof and trusses. And so I came up with a system where we used, and also the headers around the windows and the doors are different lengths. And I decided to use a double 2x10 header completely around the house to tie it all together, and to give enough surface to put to hang the trusses on. A truss has it's called a heel truss, and it's got the heel is a part that goes below the bottom of the rafter and sets in a hanger. And so with the double 2x10s, we could just set hangers all the way around to hang these trusses on. And there wouldn't be any having to line them up. They'd all be lined up, just snap a line and hang all those, put the hangers on line and just drop those trusses in with a crane, boom, boom, boom. And I also had redesigned the trusses, so instead of being 24 inches on center, they were 32 inches on center, which saved about $1,500 in trusses cost that. So we did all that, saved a tremendous amount of time, money for materials, a lot of time in construction, and made it perfect roof. And that's really necessary for a metal roof because we ordered the metal roofing from a place in Texas, and they pre-cut everything. And if your roof goes up and down here, you're going to have a lot of fiddling around, and it's not easy to do with metal on the roof. Believe me, it's kind of dangerous too. It's sharp and whatnot. So that all happened, and I was very proud of that and the way it came out. The whole house, it had a Rumford fireplace, and I put in the floor outside air supply, so it had outside air and wasn't drawing air through the house. It had dyed concrete floor that soaked up the sun and mass. And then before, we shot plaster on the inside, and I'll never do that again because it was very dangerous. We had to...
bouncing everywhere.
Yeah,
probably.
and what I did before we plastered, though, is I took pictures, detailed pictures, with a sign that said what wall it was and what direction it was, before we did any plastering. Because after you've put that adobe plaster on, it's about 2 to 3 inches thick. You can't find any of those outlets or any of that wiring or any of that plumbing.
Yeah.
Or the boards you put in the straw bale wall to support the cabinets and stuff. So we had pictures of that. We knew exactly where that stuff was. Didn't have any problem finding anything. So that was all those things were part of really advancing straw bale construction, which was mostly done on small, pretty simple rustic houses. This is the scale of a really nice custom house. That had all the features and getting it all done right.
That's
and
great.
Very proud of that. And so I got to explain that to people when it was on the tour. And I'd love to go back and visit it because I know the house works well. Oh, we did a built-in passive solar water heater on the roof. It's built-in totally into the roof.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to take a really short break. We'll be right back with John Golder right after this. Welcome back to Talk of the Bay here on KSQD. And I'm here with John Golder, and we've been talking about some of the adventures he's had in his amazing life of doing design work, wilderness skills, teaching, and sports. And one thing I know you've been involved in, John, is a method of irrigation that's extremely water efficient. And I wondered if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yes, well, I ran into the inventor of this system. I believe I ran into him over here in California, and he had been given an award for developing a solar still that never corroded because it had no metal in it. He built it out of plywood and silicone and glass, and fiberglass plywood. So with no metal in it, it couldn't possibly corrode. And VITA, I think it was Volunteers in Training in America or something like that, or technical assistant. I can't remember what it meant. But he got an award from the state of California for that. And so that got my attention. And he was an old guy, and he was a little bit like a mad scientist, but he was very, very, very courteous, genial fellow, and didn't mind at all sharing what he knew. He loved to teach people, and he was always experimenting. He knew science extremely well. He knew materials extremely well, and he played around with stuff, just like Steve Beer at Zoneworks. He just knew how to fiddle around with it and get it working right. So I had helped him build a Y2K garden in Cottonwood, Arizona, for the guy who wrote the Pyramid book, Patrick Flanagan. And I'd met him, and he brought me up to help up there, and we're out there, and he's got this raised bed garden and concrete blocks, and but no mortar between the blocks. I couldn't see any mortar, and they were out of line, you know. And I said, Horace, how are you going to fix this thing? He says, watch. So he starts going down the line, and all he had was a shovel and a tamping the gravel with his feet, poking here and tamping there, and in 10 minutes he had the wall perfectly straight. I said, Horace, how'd you do this? He said, the secret is silicone. He said, I buy silicone caulk by the case, really cheap, and I get brand new blocks, and they're clean, and I silicone them together. No mortar, no heavy mortar to mess around, you know. And I just stack them up, and silicone them, and, you know, and then, you know, and I get them all straight like that, you know. And
Wow.
And then he put a board across the top that kept them in line and had holes so you could put plastic pipe in it and bend that over and make a little greenhouse. So just by putting plastic pipe in loops over the garden and having a quickie greenhouse there in the wintertime. So this is Cottonwood, Arizona. It gets pretty cold in the wintertime. And Patrick was really afraid of Y2K coming, so Horace did this garden for him. But it was the inside of the garden, the way it worked, that was really fascinating. And he later on invited me up to his place. He lived in Woodruff, Arizona, a little tiny Mormon community up there, northern Arizona, Coconino County. Mostly Mormons, and he fitted in perfect because he was a do-it-yourself kind of guy, and he loved to garden, and you know, he just liked to work on his stuff. And he had this kind of abandoned old adobe house that was falling apart. The windows, it was missing windows and no doors and stuff. And a kitchen that was no more than a bucket and a hose. But he had this neat little raised bed garden. He said, "Let me show you something." And he takes me outside this raised bed garden. It's perfect height, so you can, and it's about 4 foot wide. You can reach over it from either side. And he said, "This system is automatically fit. By the roots, the plants control the watering in the system, and it's completely mulched on the top because all the water comes from underneath, and it's fed by a little float valve." And so I'm looking at the thing, and he's pointing out the different features in that, and he said, "Watch, this is how I take care of my garden." And he goes down the line, and he says, "Oh, there's a weed. You know, there's like a 1-inch weed coming out through all this mulch, right?" He picks it up with 2 fingers and flips it off, you know. There's a bug, and he takes his finger, you know, your index finger and thumb, and knocks that little bug off the leaf. Says, "I'm done." But he was getting an average of over 2 pounds of food per square foot of garden, which is about almost I think it was 23% over the average garden yield or agricultural yield, and that was in northern Arizona, only 154-day growing season. So that's about, I think it was about 17% less sunlight, 18% less sunlight. So that's a phenomenal increase. You know, if you look at agriculture on a large scale. And this thing can be done on any scale from a flower pot to 10,000 acres. So I was very intrigued. I said, "This is incredible." So he sent me away. He gave me all his material. He was not good at merchandising. He built his systems, and he used really durable material that was expensive, and so he sold kits, and that's how he was selling it, and through ads in the paper and various publicity. And I've got all his original material. He gave me a 30-foot trailer for helping him with a couple of projects and stuff. Oh, he also took me out to the little Colorado River, and in it, there was bubbles coming up from the water. I said, "What's going on here, Horace?" He said, "Watch." And he goes and he wades out there with a match and lights one of these bubbles, and it flares.
Oh.
I said, "Methane, right?" He said, "Yeah, methane." During when there's not the flood season, the weeds grow like crazy down here. When the flood season comes, all this mud comes down and buries them, and they decompose underneath the mud, and methane comes out.
Yeah.
So talk about a natural source; it could be harvested. So he developed this system by looking at the lush growth in a riparian area that has stable water table. So he reproduces that by starting with a waterproof membrane, and he used a pond membrane, which is really tough and strong and can handle anything, but it's very expensive. And then on that, he put gravel on top of that, and about 6 to 8 inches of gravel, which takes time and money to move, and that. And then on top of that, he put a filter fabric and then the magic layer was 2 inches of silt. 2 inches of silt that capillaries the water up into the soil above, and the soil above can be anywhere from 6 inches deep for a starter garden up to about 2 foot deep for something like corn, which is close to the limits of capillary action. And I could explain that to you, but it was a scientific paper that was a real experiment, but that's about the limit.
Right.
And that's without using physics, but actually doing the experiment for silt. So I've been working for more than 20 years to simplify the system and make it cheaper. And so now I start with used carpet, which you can get paid to take from the dump. And you can find anywhere from any carpet company. They'll hand you as much used carpet as you can handle. So that goes down first in my raised bed garden, right? Oh, and by the raised bed, I'll use anything to make the raised bed. It could be straw bales, it could be rocks, it could be old wood, but anything. It doesn't matter as long as it can stand up a little bit, and get 3 feet high and not collapse. So on top of the carpet, I put 2 layers of 6 mil poly, which is inexpensive, and 2 layers of it, and that's to protect the carpet, is to protect the poly while you're standing in a pair of socks doing the next phase of it. The next phase of it, instead of gravel, is what I call void waste, and void waste is 80% of your household waste, and that's anything that water will go through or has spaces for water to get into. And I have a little acronym I use for that. It's got to be PPINTS. Okay, all right. PP means permeable or perforated. I means insoluble, can't dissolve in water, and NTS is not toxic. Okay,
Right.
or an S, not toxic or sharp. NTS. Okay, so going by that, so if you go through your household waste, you'll find 80% of your household waste meets those criteria.
Huh.
And that's a huge component of our landfill.
Yeah.
But they compress it with these big, heavy doses. Now, that's a lot of work and energy. All right? So imagine, I want anybody to try the experiment. You go through your household waste, and you can call me up. Can I get my phone number over the air? Or is that dangerous?
Yeah, you can.
All right.
You may get phone calls, but
Well,
it's up to you.
I
so.
don't mind on the subject, okay. So it's 831-854-3760, because there's no such number as O. Okay, so give me a call if you want to try this out. And just go through your household waste. And I would pay, if I was doing a big system, I would pay a couple bucks for every bag of void waste that you could produce. And it's a perfect system for turf. So let's go finish with the system. So we got the void waste. Instead of expensive geo fabric that he used, I use old clothing because it's permeable And it's great. It's a simple any old
it's
clothing.
a separating membrane.
Just throw it on top of the void waste. Kind of fill in the gaps and make it a little more level.
Right.
And then your next layer is your silt layer. Now, there's a lot of places to find silt. It's a byproduct of washing sand. So you can go to any place that sells sand, and they got huge ponds where they let the finest silt settle out, and then they recirculate the water. But silt you can find silt all over the place. Where I'm doing my garden, my entire soil is silt. I got a foot of silt, so that's great. But I do mix other stuff in with it. I mix organics with it, and it goes through about a 2-year process before it winds up in the garden. So at least a couple inches of silt, and then your topsoil. Okay, and then you can mulch, because what happens is the water gets soaked up through the capillary action of the silt and the permeable membrane underneath it.
So the water is actually underneath all
The
of this,
water
huh?
is at the bottom of the topsoil, okay? And you can feed this system. You don't need any real water pressure you need an absolute minimum of water pressure to feed it. You can use what's called a standpipe in agriculture. It's just a big pipe that's filled up with water, and it helps to know what your flow of water is and how much water you're using over a given time as it soaks up in irrigation ditch or whatever. So you can do a small standpipe and measure exactly how much water your plants use. And that's called the evapotranspiration rate in agriculture. Exactly how much water the plants suck up, and some of it's lost through evaporation, and the rest goes into building the plant. So you can mulch as heavily as you want with the system. And I've used all kinds of things for mulch. The bottom line is you get hardly any weeds and hardly any bugs.
Yeah.
And you can defeat the critters in the top. Of course, it's a raised bed garden. That's pretty easy to do. And so I don't know how much water it saves, but my guess it saves anywhere from 25 to 30% of the water. But you'll be able to measure it exactly and know. And you can go away. If you set the seam up right, if you use a float valve, you can set it up and go away for 2 months on vacation. Your plants are perfectly watered. And
And you want a float valve on your standpipe to get the water?
Yeah.
Where the water is
or you can
soaking
just pour
in.
it. If it's a small garden, you just pour in what you need, and the standpipe will have it there and available for the plants.
Yeah, and this is a vertical pipe. I mean, for those who haven't pictured it, it's a vertical pipe sunk into the soil.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. And the plants love it. They grow like crazy. The roots become practically a solid mass. And that's in my little gardens where I can't space them far enough apart. But shoot, I grow cherry tomatoes through this winter. And onions all the time. I propagate onions. When I cut an onion, I cut a little extra off the top or the bottom and throw it in there, and it grows new onion. I got green onions coming up all the time.
That's
Harvest
great.
them. And it just takes up no room at all to speak of. It's just sitting on a table out in my little bitty porch.
So do you have a spot where you've got this capillary irrigation going in a
Well,
garden?
I did a mound system to see how that would work growing broccoli. And the broccoli went nuts. I mean, every time I cut off a stalk of broccoli, 5 more came up, and it was 4 foot high.
Wow.
And you can eat the leaves of broccoli too. It's just as good as spinach. Yeah, so I mean, it'll grow damn near anything. I mean, you experiment with it, and you can do a garden where the south side of it is your little starter garden, and that's at a certain level. Let's just say 4 or 6 inches of soil. And you step that up a different list, and next maybe 6 or 8 inches for lettuce, and then a little bit more for maybe beets or something like that, and go on up to corn or whatever you want. And so it's all one. So the bottom is all at the same level. The separation layer is the same.
Yeah, you just got
more soil
and
for
higher
each
soil,
one. Yeah, and you have the small plants in front of the tall plants. So in the winter, the small plants can get the sunshine. And tall plants are generally summer plants anyway. They're not going to grow through the winter. So it's a beautiful system. It works extremely well, and I will teach anybody for free if they're serious and they're a resident, okay? And I'll teach you how to get all these materials for nothing, except the plastic. There's ways to get plastic, but I will not reveal them on the radio. Anyway, so I had to come. Horst didn't have a good name for it. He called it the wick water system, which is, I don't know, it sounds too close to wicked or something. It just and I came up with the name capillary irrigation, And it's all squeezed together in one word, and with the lettering, it people can kind of picture exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
But capital irrigation, and if I ever trademark it, that'll be the name I do it under. But I teach people for free if they're serious. I'll come out and show you how to do all this. I've got flyers. I'm redoing my flyers with better graphics. But it's a fabulous system. Okay, it's very little maintenance and tremendous production.
Yeah, it sounds promising. I want to give it a try in my little garden. So,
And I'm trying to get Parks and Rec to do a side-by-side comparison with some standard irrigation in this system, so we can calculate. And you got to have conditions all the same for each patch of ground, and actually measure scientifically how much water this thing saves.
that would be great.
I'm hoping it'll happen.
So, speaking of parks and recreation, you've advocated for more sports fields particularly for youth in the community. And we really don't have time to go into this in depth, but I wonder if you could just give us a little capsule summary of where the city stands in terms of how much sports fields we got and how much we could use if we had them.
Well, to encapsulate it as short as possible, they're 50 years behind. Okay, we built one ball field in more than 50 years, Depot Park, and they screwed that one up because there was a lot of fill on that lot, being an old railroad yard, and there was holes in the artificial turf, the non-sustainable artificial turf that they with. And they had to rebuild it after 2 years. They closed it for almost 2 years, had a huge lawsuit against the engineer and the architect, and wound up having to pay $1.4 million to fix it. So that's not a very good record.
No, and the population has grown in the last 50 years from about 22,000, if I remember right, in Santa Cruz to now about 58.
Well, their dirty, dark secret is they've been telling the state for since '72 on their CEQA environmental checklist that added growth doesn't have any impact on recreational facilities, nothing significant. Well, that's a whole nother discussion. It'll be a whole nother show because I've been fighting this for 30 years, and I decided instead to just, instead of asking permission, to go up in Pogonip and build it, and they will come. Because they've had the master plan done for Pogonip for 28 years, and I stood in front of the original task force for an entire year trying to get them to have ball fields, and the task force actually recommended it at the city council meeting, the largest public hearing Santa Cruz has ever had in the Civic Auditorium, standing room only, on the radio, live on radio. I was one of 5 featured speakers, and Mr. Rotkin came in with his resolution already made out, and we got 0 sports fields. And now 28 later, they got 2 trails built. The homeless garden thing is a complete wreck. They never did their due diligence, and toxic waste is going to cost $300,000 or $400,000 just to clean that up. And I could go on and it's not a subject for this show. It's just, but if you want to know,
clearly we've got a deficit of sports.
If
space,
you're really curious,
outdoor sports space,
a huge deficit, and it's documented going back 35, 40 years. I've gone all the way back to the 1970 Parks Plan and everything since then, and I've worked my tail end off. I was on the rugby club for 10 years here, and we never had a home field. And our club basically dissolved because we never had a home field, even though we were a very, very good club. People would come from clear across the world to play us, mainly because we were good partiers, but we played a good rugby game too. Anyway, so
now you've taught people and you've learned a lot of outdoor skills, obviously a lot of building skills, and you've taught some of those skills to folks.
Yes.
And I understand you've actually got a secret place where you have implemented a lot of the skills that you teach.
Yes. Well, it's build it and they will come. If you don't know that phrase, look it up on Google. It's about a movie called The Field of Dreams. But yeah, I have created a family campground, and actually I describe it as the Greenbelt Guardians Pioneer Outpost number 1, that's one, but the name of it is Camp Pogonito Libertad, which means Little Free Pogonip. Okay, it's completely hidden. It's a beautiful spot with an incredible microclimate. You can't see it from anywhere. It's got pasture, it's got forest, it's got the creek, it's got everything you need. to have a wonderful time. I've got 13 campsites up there, all different kinds, for groups to individual bivouacs. The wildlife coming there, it's been built very slowly over 6 years by me, my own blood, sweat, and tears, by hand. There's no machines. I never use a machine up there, And I give time for the critters to move. The trail would take me 6 months to finish a segment of trail, just because I'm careful about where the trail's going to be and what it's going to interrupt. And the deer come up, the coyote come up. I've got more stories than I can tell here about how the wildlife is just incredible. And so it's an experience that I want to share with the community. And it will be a highly vetted private membership club, which sounds exclusive, but if you're serious and you have integrity and you want to learn and you want to be away from the cars and out in the middle of nature and mix with nature and see nature right at your fingertips, get in touch with me. Camp Poganito Libertad.
Should they call you, or do you have another way?
Well, I've got an
to be
email
reached?
that you can use. Okay.
Great.
Don't
Do you
abuse
mind
it.
sharing
Don't
that?
abuse it, folks. I'll give it to you. I go by Captain Jhond now. I'm known on the street by Captain Jhond because I've been captain of a whole lot of things, including most ball teams I've been on, and I've been in charge of a whole lot of things. And I'm used to being, and I'm a sailor too. I can captain anything, and I can handle just about any emergency. I got 1,000 stories. But so my email is ahoy, AHOY, .captain, CAPT, .jhond. Now, J is in John, H is in hello, O is in over, N is in no, and D is in dog, okay, at gmail.com. So that's it. And I'll get back with you eventually. I'm a terrible typist, and but my old email had 6,800 unread emails, so I gave up on that one. Every time you go online, every time you go online, somebody's trying to sell you something. They're selling your data. I don't care what you're looking at. They know what you were looking at and how long you're looking at it. Yep. So yeah, I'm looking for staff. I'm looking for people who want to learn. I can't pay you at this point in time, but we will have money eventually. I guarantee it. This is something that providing a place to relax, a place to learn, a place to study, a place to play sports, all different kinds. We're going to have everything from darts to sumo wrestling up there. We've got a little field, and we can do all that on a small scale. And, the big secret is it's going to be underground, built into the hillside solar clubhouse. Well, you'll be able to party all night and not disturb anything, not even the raccoons.
Great thing about underground.
Yeah, well, it's extremely stable temperature, and there'll be room for a big party. I'm just going to say there's room for a big party. We're building 2 pickleball courts and a basketball court, clay courts.
Wow.
It's all sustainable. Every time I cut something down, I sit it by the trail and look at it for months until I figure out the use for it. So the city knows where I am. They're not messing with me. The ranger that knows where I am said, "You're part of the solution, not part of the problem." And so we got something going here. We got something going here that Santa Cruz has wanted and provide most of the things the city promised up in Poganip, but has not delivered and really cannot deliver. The process just doesn't work.
Well, we are out of time. So, John Golder, I want to thank you for coming in, and I want to give you a couple minutes here to make any concluding remarks that you'd like our listeners to know about.
Well, here's one thing I want to tell you, because people get frustrated with government, and we have lofty goals in our plans, but they rarely come out the way we want them. And I think what's happening downtown is a big example of that. We didn't expect to see skyscrapers in town. Santa Cruz. The book I'm going to write is going to be Santa Cruz, the city that wants to be a town. and the subtitle is going to be, they called it planning. I spent 6 years in the planning department as a building inspector, and I know what they can and can't do. And the bottom line is they got to hear from you. And I've added to the city general plan and goals on my birthday in 2008, final hearing on the goals. It said informed and involved citizenry. That was all it was, the number one civic community goal. I had them add the phrase, responsive and effective government. Now, who was going to vote against that? Lynn. Who was going to argue against that?
Responsive and effective government.
Yeah, well, if they argued against it, they would not be reelected at all. So they have an obligation they've never had before. And I've been enforcing that for a long, long time now. In fact, I've done more records requests than anybody I know. Hundreds of records requests, and I save every one of them and all their responses. And you can look them up anytime. If you give me a call or email me, or just search for my name, John Golder, on the website. You'll get to my daughter-in-law because Golder will pop up. You know, she's on the council. But no, you need to keep. You got to the Open Government Act. Jerry Brown, not Jerry, Jerry's father, is your most powerful tool as a citizen. The people of the state of California have the right to know what their government is up to, and they have the right, I love this part, to instruct their representatives. And the Records Act is part of that. If you want to know about getting any information what the city's doing, I can help you out.
That's wonderful.
They tried to stop me with a permanent injunction. I whipped them in court in 15 minutes.
And that's another story.
That's another story, too. It's a damn good one, too.
Well, John Golder, it's been a pleasure. And, I look forward to having you back. Let's catch up as things develop in all your pursuits. Yeah. And thank you again for being here.
You're going to have to come up and see me.
I'm going to do that.
All right.
Take care.
All right. Over and out. Carry on.